right, so today I have Jared Michaud joining me to talk about The Matrix. How's it going, Jared?
It's going great, PJ. I've been looking forward to doing this, man. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, no, me too. And The Matrix is such a huge movie, an impactful movie. I feel like if you're our age or anywhere around that, if you're a boy who was, 8 to 18 when this movie came out, it probably had like a huge impact. You probably remember it. It changed the culture. It changed movies. I think I read something this week that said by the year 2002, there was 200 and some odd movies that used bullet time. Because of The Matrix. It was like that impactful on movies in that era. So I don't know if you saw like movies like The One with Jet Li or even Kung Pao did like a joke that was bullet time, but it was the cow.
I don't remember.
Oh man.
I was my okay, I'm better than Abby as far as watching movies, but not by a huge amount because it just was never a big thing for my family. So
my family is a movie family, so that's why I'm such a nerd about it. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
nice.
when it comes to The Matrix, it's one of those things where what would I say? I watched it and it was like, whoa, and I wanted it to be something it wasn't. And so I didn't see the Gnostic, any of the philosophy behind it at first. It took me until the trilogy came out, and then it kind of hit me full in the face, and I'm like, wow. Okay.
I mean, in all honesty, though, I don't feel like most Americans, if you're outside of the mystery schools, were even familiar with Gnosticism till the last 20 years, really, because, the Nag Hammadi was found in the 1947, but it wasn't until people like Dan Brown that started to popularize it around 2000 that people started to become aware of it. And this is like one of those early introductions to this concept that's now everywhere. It's now, especially in the conspiracy world, it's everywhere. And the spiritualism, Instagrams and TikToks, it's like, even if people don't know what they're calling it, like these ideas that were presented in The Matrix are everywhere.
Yeah, but even back then, I loved Star Wars, and it has kind of a similar vibe to it. And I had sort of figured out that there was something wrong with it, and it never struck me that The Matrix was basically the same sort of backstory, the same sort of foundation until much later. And then I was just super disappointed, but I still love the movie like crazy. I mean, it's such a good movie.
Well, it's like I say, like all movies are basically propaganda, but you got to learn to enjoy the propaganda for what it is. Like, recognize the propaganda, enjoy the film. That's what I do. That's why I don't know. I think I'm happier than some people for that reason. But let's just jump into what this is, and we'll get into the philosophy and all that, because there's so much to unpack here. So The Matrix, if you've been living under a rock for some reason, this was the first installment in a sci-fi film series directed by the Wachowski brothers, sisters, quote unquote. No, just joking. The Wachowski brothers. I'll get canceled for that one. It was released in 1999. It stars Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Hugo Weaving. And according to IMDb, they give a plot summary that says Thomas A. Anderson is a man living two lives. By day, he's an average computer programmer. By night, he's a hacker known as Neo. Neo has always questioned his reality, but the truth is far beyond his imagination. Neo finds himself targeted by the police when he is contacted by Morpheus, a legendary computer hacker branded a terrorist by the government. As a rebel against the machines, Neo must confront the agents, superpowered computer programs devoted to stopping Neo and the entire human rebellion. It's kind of weird because I feel like that would be a good summary if you'd never seen it. It's not a good summary of the movie, but it would be like an enticing lead into without spoiling the big reveal.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good way to do it without spoiling. And with The Matrix, you can't afford to spoil it.
No.
You can't. So, yeah.
And that's why I'll say this here. Everybody always gets on me for not saying this. Spoiler warning, we're going to spoil the living crap out of this movie because we're dissecting every part of it. So if you came into this thinking that if you haven't seen The Matrix, just go watch it anyway. Like you should at least see it. But we're going to definitely
pause this, go watch it, then come back because we're going to be we have to pull it apart.
All stones will be overturned
choice.
For sure. So this movie cost $63 million to make, which isn't insane. I would have expected more, honestly. But it made over $460 million worldwide in its first release, which is way higher than I thought.
Well, it's interesting because this was the Wachowski brothers' very first major release of any kind. They had a few
Assassins
things
before this.
Right. They had, but nothing that was like
Nothing like this.
Earth-shattering, nothing like this. And this was, so I'm a little surprised they were able to get the 60 whatever million it was, It's like Hollywood took a chance.
There's a lot of stories behind this. Apparently they had to petition for a really long time to get it made. And then there's one story that's kind of maybe not true. One story says that they were given 10 million and that they dropped all 10 million into the opening scene. And once they showed the studio that, they greenlit it. Apparently it's not entirely true, but what happened is the studio was getting cold feet. So they stopped everything else, made the opening perfect, showed the studio, and the studio got off their back and just like let the money flow.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
But you're right. I mean, you wouldn't think you'd hand this big of a movie and that big of a budget to the Wachowski brothers, who had only done a movie that I've never even seen Assassins. Like, I know about it, but it's not like a huge movie that people talk about.
No, and it makes sense with what you said, that opening scene. That also makes a little more sense of why the opening scene was quite what it was, because I was watching it and I'm going, we already see some of the tropes that we're going to see throughout this movie right here.
Oh yeah.
They've already pulled it up, and I'm like, this is interesting, because it hadn't stuck to me. The opening scene never stuck to me before.
And we'll come back and dissect that opening scene in just a minute. This gets an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a little lower than I would have thought. It didn't actually have as warm of a critics' response as I expected. I mean, a lot of people talk about this movie, and I think rightfully so, as during this time, you've got a lot of these big budget action films that were not intelligent films. And this movie was a smart film and a sci-fi film and a huge action film with crazy expensive budget on explosions and guns and kung fu and all that stuff. Yet it's got a smarter story than you'd expect of that type. So you think the critics would be a little bit more warm to it. Not that they weren't. But the 83% is a little bit lower than I would have thought. The critical consensus on IMDb says, thanks to the Wachowskis' imaginative vision, The Matrix is a smartly crafted combination of spectacular action and groundbreaking special effects. They kind of leave out anything about the plot, and maybe that's because people didn't get the plot back then. A lot of people didn't. It was like Inception. I wasn't that confused by it, but yet when you talk to people, like, I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was. I don't know, maybe it was that they didn't want to spoil it, because you can't spoil The Matrix if you want to. So I don't know. But yeah. Joss Whedon called this film his #1 film, and he praised its storytelling, structure, and depth, concluding it works on whatever level you want to bring to it. I mean, I agree with Joss Whedon on that. It does work on a bunch of different levels. It does.
And Joss Whedon, for people who are not familiar, directed Avengers, Firefly. He's a big nerd. I think he did an X-Men cartoon at one point. He's done a lot of good work. But Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader reviewed this film negatively. He called it a simple-minded fun for roughly the first hour until the movie becomes overwhelmed by its many sources. There's not much humor to keep it all life-size, and by the final stretch, it's become bloated, mechanical, and tiresome.
So he missed it.
He didn't get it, right? I mean, I watched it again last night for the first time in 10 years, I feel like, and I found myself enjoying it. Like, the CGI is 25 years old, and you kind of get that. But it doesn't feel like an outdated movie. It doesn't feel like, sometimes I'll go back to a movie that I loved as a kid, and it feels like, oh man, not what I expected or not what I remember. This one felt like I expected it to.
Well, as a writer, what I would say is, if you do things that break immersion, that's what tends to pull people out. It's like if you're relying too heavily on your special effects, or if you're relying too heavily on this or that. But really, the movie was exactly what it was supposed to be all the way through. They never overplayed their hand. And so for that reason, I don't think that this movie ever outdates itself. I just don't think it does.
No, and again, like, the only reason I say 83% feels too low on Rotten Tomatoes is because I just think about the cultural impact of this movie. Like, everybody thinks about this movie. It's stuck in the American imagination. I heard one guy describe it as not a flower growing in a garden amongst other movies, but it's the flower bed itself. It's that everything has kind of been built up from The Matrix since 1999. And it might be a little overstated, but it's not wrong to say that this movie had a deep cultural impact.
Well, it's like talking about Star Wars,
Right,
It's at that kind of level of iconic, and you just can't. you can't overstate the impact of that. You just can't.
And it doesn't even matter if the sequels, were lackluster or sucked or were confusing or whatever. Like the original Matrix in and of itself was that big. And I think, comparing it to Star Wars in a way is true. This won all 4 of the categories it was nominated for the year that it came out at the Academy Awards. It won Best Film Editing, Best Sound Effects Editing, and Best Visual Effects. So mostly praise for the sound and visual effects, but still, I mean, again, the storytelling was good. It made it. I don't know if it should have been nominated for anything else, but it at least got those awards. So, with all that out of the way, I want to get into the philosophy because we were talking before the show, and I think before we can even dive into what is happening in the Matrix and explaining what's going on screen for people who missed it, I think you have to understand the underlying philosophy of the film to even start to parse out what's going on. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Because, you can watch it just as a fun story, but really, if you want to get what they're doing, you have to get into the philosophy of it. And it almost beats you over the head with it when you watch it and you know what you're looking at.
Yeah, when you notice it. And it was a very intentional. This movie was not just a how do I put this? It wasn't just here's a message, take from what you will. The Wachowskis kind of played that card sometimes because I think they were being tongue-in-cheek or trying to lead a horse to water, but they definitely had a philosophy behind this. They definitely had a message, they definitely had a goal. And so much so that the studio insisted that they put a great deal of explanatory language in this. They described this film, this screenplay was known in Hollywood as, quote, the script that nobody understands. And because of that, at the director's request, well, maybe not even because of that, I think it's just because the philosophy was that important to the Wachowski brothers, that they requested that every actor and most of the set had to be able to understand and explain the Matrix, not just as a film, but as a philosophy. So they wanted, if you listen to like DVD commentaries or interviews with directors and camera, like everybody that's been interviewed about this film, they're going into the philosophy because they were all trained deeply in the philosophy of this film. So it wasn't just an actor was like, oh, I think it was this. Like they were told explicitly. They had to read different books. They had to read, I think I left this out of my notes. This is going to bother me. There's a book that they had to read in order to even be an actor on the film. And they had to be able to kind of explain this book. It was Simulation and Simulacrum, which is a 1989 philosophy book by a French author.
Interesting. I didn't know any of that. That's kind of amazing, actually. And it makes perfect sense when you explain it because it did. At every level, they got the philosophy, all the way down the line in the movie.
Yeah, and there's a few places I'm going to talk about in a minute where the philosophy didn't show through fully, but it was because of the studio. It was because the studio was not wanting to put certain things in the film that the Wachowski brothers had written into the script. Two in particular that I'm going to bring up.
Okay.
But I think we all kind of get at this point. You and me know. So let's just talk about this. This is a Gnostic film. This is a Gnostic messianic figure film through and through, and it's very, very clear. And I've been asked a lot of times, especially recently, if I have a video that just explains Gnosticism for people to like reference, to go to like get the full philosophy, because I'm constantly talking about it. I just talked about it on the Lego movie episode I did. I talked about it on Conspiracy Pill with the Lizard Men, and it just comes up over and over and over and over again. So I just want to say this to the audience. I am planning to do a full Gnosticism breakdown that I can put it, link in the description, and people can go and watch it if they want to like fully understand the concept. But for the sake of this, I just wanted to sum down the Gnostic belief into a simple sentence or two that I think we can agree on and kind of move forward based on that concept. So the belief in Gnosticism boils down to the material world was created mistakenly through evil intent by a demigod known as Yaldabaoth. And he's a willingly ignorant of the good and one true God. And the only way to triumph over evil in this world is by obtaining secret knowledge, also gnosis, because gnosis is Greek for knowledge. So it's a secret knowledge mystery school that was spun out of Christianity in the early days. Some people call it Gnostic Christianity, which it's not, because it denies Christ's divinity and it denies all kinds of things. Yeah. And there's further things we get into that. But is that like a fair summary of what's important?
Yeah, I think it is. But I also, if it's all right, want to sort of bring in a comparison to what we know to be the truth there, because it really, when I was watching it, you almost have to divide between the two as you go. So what I'm speaking of here is that all mystery religion, all Gnostic teaching sort of takes the truth, what we know to be the truth, and it steals the parts of it that it wants, and then it calls God the bad guy.
Yeah.
And so when, just for example, this is a story of waking up, right? The Matrix is about waking up from a false reality into a real reality. Well, we know that that's true of Christians. When you find Jesus, it's like the scales fall off your eyes and you start to see things differently than you ever did before. So they kind of stole that. But the way that works in a Christian sense is basically that it's already there in front of you. It's just that you're not seeing it.
Right.
Where with the Gnostic folks, that isn't true. They have to actually sort of reveal hidden knowledge, things that you couldn't know without their teaching, to accomplish that.
It's kind of the opposite of C.S. Lewis, right? Because C.S. Lewis writes a book where he's just like, look, Christianity's self-evident, and it's self-evident in, you know, all these different ways, whereas Gnosticism is not self-evident. It's the opposite. It's like for the elect. And even in Gnostic belief, there's this idea that some people are essentially NPCs, we'll just call them that, and that they can't be woken up, that they can't escape, that they are doomed to be NPCs forever, and that there are other special people who can be woken up and can reach the truth and become fully spiritual beings. It's a divorce and a hatred of the material world to the extreme, whereas Christianity, and I know some Christians think that that is Christianity, and it's not. Christianity is very explicit that we will have, renewed bodies and all this stuff in the end time. So this idea of divorcing completely the spiritual from the physical is a Gnostic and not a Christian concept, and it's what this film is based on.
Right. Yeah. And I actually wrote down here in my notes, notice that throughout the movie, when they bring him in on the truth, they do exactly that. They're revealing hidden knowledge. It's not a dawning of understanding. It's twisting of reality into its supposed true form.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other thing to understand here is dualism, which is a part of Gnostic dualism. And dualism is the doctrine that the universe is built on two separate opposing principles. So you've got the material and spiritual, or you could say good and evil. So the spiritual is good, everything that is completely spiritual is good, and the material, again, was created by the bad God that created this universe. The idea in Gnosticism, again, is that the God, the creator of Earth, is an evil God who created us out of evil intentions. He's denying the one true God, and therefore everything material is bad, that we have a divine spark within us, and that divine spark needs to be separated from our physical bodies and reach an eternal plane with the one true God above the God that Christians call God, the God of the Old Testament and all that stuff. They deny that. They say he's the evil, they say Satan, essentially. I mean, look, and Gnosticism is a complicated, complex thing where there's a bunch of different schools, but I think that understanding that we're giving is enough to grasp the movie, hopefully.
It's a good base. The other thing that I want to bring up that isn't quite directly related is this whole post-apocalyptic scene. It's kind of designed to put the watcher in the frame of mind that, of course, everything is awful. So even winning looks kind of grim. It's, in a Christian sense, when we win, God makes everything good and beautiful. But in the context of a post-apocalyptic sort of story, it brings you in with sort of the automatic assumption that even if you win, everything isn't going to be amazing. It's going to be a lot better than it would have been otherwise. So that's sort of preparing people at a very low level for this thing they're doing in reality, which is the Great Awakening versus the Great Reset thing. Right. So
well, that in itself is kind of a red pill, blue pill thing, is it not? It's this choice between a false binary.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's there through the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back to the red pill, blue pill. I want to go a little bit further into dualism, because dualism is represented in this movie very strongly in Neo. Right off the bat, he's a programmer by day, hacker by night. He's living two lives. He's Thomas Anderson, and he's Neo. He's two different people. He's dual. He's got two different aspects of himself, one that's spiritual and one that is physical. And the separation of the spiritual and physical is shown throughout this movie, and we'll come back to that. Another character that no one really talks about is Switch. Which is a very interesting character. Switch was originally supposed to be played by two actors. It was supposed to be a male actor in the real world and a female actor in the Matrix. This is the one thing that the studios made them cut because it was way too on the nose for a transgender agenda, right? Which is, well, this person's two-spirit, this person is the gender non-binary. And in the film, you'll notice that Switch in one scene is wearing chest bindings. You know, like she's very androgynous. So you've got that whole thing. So they toned it down, made her androgynous and whatever. But it was originally supposed to be that their physical self was the male and their spiritual self was the female. And it was this Gnostic dualistic concept, which is transgenderism is a Gnostic dualistic concept. And that's a whole nother episode to go deeper into it. But it's very, people have written about this a lot. You can find stuff on this.
I wasn't aware of that, but that is kind of amazing.
Isn't it though?
Yeah, it is.
And further with the dualism, like Switch is the only character wearing white. So you've got Switch in between Trinity and Neo. So you've got the feminine aspect of Trinity, the masculine aspect of Neo, and then this black and white Gnostic dualistic imagery where it's Switch in between, you know, Neo, and it's kind of the blending of the two, which is a Gnostic concept.
Yep.
So I just thought that the dualism really shows the most in those characters. But let's just get into what happens. So this movie opens with Trinity in room 303, which if you're, you know, paying attention, that should just jump right off the page at you. Just 303. What do you think of that opening part?
You know, it kind of struck me at the time. I had never noticed it before last night when I watched it, just how how sort of impressive it was and how crisp it was. And, you know, you talking about them going ahead and making it perfect for the studio makes it make perfect sense to me why they spent so much time on it, but they really did.
They spent 6 months training for that scene.
Yeah. And right off the bat in that opening scene, you're already seeing this sort of dualistic representation of Trinity versus the bad guys being the left hand and the right hand paths of the dialectic right off the bat. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
They made it so stark.
Yeah. And again, it really hit me when I saw the opening. It's like they opened room 33 with the 0 in between, which is interesting because it's a nod to binary code a little bit, but I think it's also a nod to, I mean, the 33 is obvious. The O is in some cases is a representation of God or the dais that's in between the pillars. So you've got this very Freemasonic, this person is enlightened, this person is, you know, at this level of the, you know, Masonic, hierarchy. And it's just, the movie starts there and ends there. We'll come back to how it ends in room 303, but it's just the fact that they made it open in 303 with Trinity, which is again, a representation of the triune God. A three in one spirit is very interesting. And she's also Sophia, the idea of knowledge, or not knowledge, but the idea of wisdom. Sophia is this, in Gnostic belief, Sophia is part of the Barbalos. She's this feminine aspect of the one true God. And it's really hard to parse this out, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the Trinity has been twisted in Gnosticism to be something very different. But they believe the Holy Spirit is Sophia. So Trinity is a representation not of the whole triune, but of the Holy Spirit aspect of God. And she's the female aspect. She's Sophia, because the Trinity in a lot of Gnostic believing is not Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's Father, Mother, Son.
And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, and then one of the things that kind of stuck out to me in that opening scene is that you already have the sort of Men in Black trope for the dark side of the dark side of the path. And then the light side, you've already got the way that they have her doing martial arts there is very, very clearly a nod to some of the spiritualistic martial arts practices in the East. It's just in your face.
Yeah, and we're not going to talk about the other movies too much, but like the second movie really dives into Eastern esotericism.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so this one like nods to it with the martial arts stuff, but when you get to the second one, it's like all kinds of Shambhala and Nirvana and a lot of concepts like that. So we get through Trinity's scene, which is one of the best action scenes in the movie. Again, opens up with 33, and then we get Thomas Anderson, and we get a room number again. We get room 101. And this is interesting for a few reasons. One, it's binary. It's like a binary joke, ones and zeros being on and off. We also get, 101's a beginner course. So you got the level 33 Trinity, and then you got the 101, the initiate, right?
Yeah.
He's also some people have pointed out that the 101 could be a representation of the pillars of Boaz and Yakin, which are the two pillars that you walk between in a Freemasonic ritual.
I can see it.
So you've got the diocese being the O in the middle, and then the ones on either side being the pillars. So there's that concept. He also, when he opens the door, you get the one eye symbolism right off the bat. So you get a lot of Illuminati symbolism right in the first 2 scenes of the movie.
And then, and then in that scene, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but Troy says, "You're my savior, man, my own personal Jesus Christ." And you're like, okay, well, that isn't on the nose or anything.
That was the most on the nose line in the whole movie. If you didn't get
there's one that's even better. We'll get to it later.
Okay. For me, at least, I'm thinking like, holy crap, because the whole line is Neo asks Troy, this guy that comes to his door to buy illegal hacking software or something. He says, "Have you ever had that feeling where you're not sure if you're awake or still dreaming?" And Troy responds, "All the time. It's called mescaline. It's the only way to fly. Hey, it just sounds to me like you need to unplug, man." And he calls him his own personal Jesus Christ. So it's like all the foreshadowing is happening right there. And it's super on the nose. It was a little too on the nose, really. I mean, again, it's like, if you didn't get that he's going to be the Jesus Christ figure of this allegory, he just says it right in the opening lines almost of the movie. And then, you need to unplug. He's already kind of hinting that he's going to unplug from the Matrix. He's making references to drugs being a way to ascend to another plane. And that concept comes back and forth. I wasn't even going to bring this up, but I want to show you this really quick.
Yeah.
I think I have a Wikipedia page here about Matrixism, which is this pseudo, internet religion that popped up after these movies around 2004. And the idea is essentially, if you come down to the tenets of it, it's like, we just do hardcore drugs to like go into like the real reality, because our world isn't real. So we need like mescaline and all of these things. So like, I just thought the mescaline reference to like what people took out of this is, I can escape the Matrix too, through DMT and mescaline and ayahuasca and stuff like that. And there's definitely people who believe that that's the way to escape the Matrix.
Absolutely, there are.
Yeah.
No, the whole thing, that's interesting. I some of this stuff that you're bringing up, I looked at the movie pretty carefully, but I didn't do a whole lot of outside research. So a lot of this stuff is new to me, and it's really fun to see it.
Yeah. Well, this might be new to you too, because I went into names. I wanted to dive into the names of it. So for Neo, his name is Thomas Anderson. Neo's his true self, his spiritual self, but his physical self name is Thomas Anderson. Thomas, some people believe, is a representation of Doubting Thomas because he plays the doubting character. He asks more questions. More of his dialogue is questions than anything in this movie. Yeah. By far, it's like 60% of his dialogue is questions. Yeah. Some other people think it means twin. Thomas does mean twin, so you've also got the Gnostic dualistic concept of Thomas and Neo being twins. But Anderson's where it gets interesting. Anderson, son of Anders, is how you would break that down. And Anders is Scandinavian for manly, so you would literally get son of man out of Anderson. Would be like a rough interpretation. So you've got this twin Gnostic dualistic son of man. He already called him Jesus Christ. We're already getting like and the references to him being the son of man are more, I don't even know more explicit, but they just keep happening.
The name Thomas A. Anderson, it just stuck straight out to me when I heard it. And I'm like, okay, there's something really significant attached to that. So I'm glad you unpacked it. That's pretty fun.
This is totally unhinged because it's definitely not what it means. But when you said it that way, Thomas A. Anderson, I went TAA. And then I remembered this movie came out. This is totally not related, but this movie came out in 1999. His passport says that his birth date is 9/11. So people make a big deal about that. His initials are TAA. And I thought that was funny.
Huh.
Yeah, it's like 2 years before the Twin Towers attacks. And you've got another scene which all of New York is destroyed, except the Twin Towers. By the way, that's another weird scene in the movie. So
yeah.
Anyway, that was totally not related to what we're talking about, but I just thought it was interesting. So after this meeting, he gets this message to follow the White Rabbit.
Right.
And the White Rabbit's interesting because it's an obvious reference to Alice in Wonderland.
It is. Did
you have any? I mean, I had somewhere I want to go with that. But do you have any thoughts on like the Alice in Wonderland diving into the rabbit hole concept in this movie?
Not exactly. The whole Alice in Wonderland thing has always just kind of been weird and icky to me, so I never really dived down that rabbit hole when I was younger, and now I kind of wish I had because there's so much there, but I don't know enough.
I never liked Alice in Wonderland personally, but yeah, I mean it's a big thing in drugs stuff, and it's I find it interesting because Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz were both used in different MK Ultra programs, and we get that here a little bit because later on in the movie you meet Cypher, and I'm going to bring up Cypher now, even though it isn't introduced till later. But his name translates to zero. Cypher is another word for zero, and if Neo is another for one, you've got ones and zeros. You've got the binary between Neo and Cypher. You've got Jesus and Judas, because Cypher is the Judas character who betrays the Jesus Christ figure in this story. But what's interesting is that you kind of know, you get the foreshadowing that he thinks about the Matrix differently than everybody else, because his first line, I think, or one of his first lines, he says to Neo is, Dorothy, we're not in Kansas anymore. So everybody else talks about it as in Alice in Wonderland. Morpheus talks about it that way. Trinity talks about it that way. And in Alice in Wonderland, it's going through the rabbit hole and finding truth, right? And in Wizard of Oz, it's about escaping. It's about, going back to your reality. And so his whole thing is, I don't want this reality. I want to go back to the one I had before. So they have a diametrically opposed view on the Matrix and the real world.
Definitely.
Yeah. So,
So the next scene, when he follows the White Rabbit, they're in this club. Do you know what the song that's playing in the club is? I
read that somewhere, and I remember them making a big deal about how it wasn't included in the Matrix soundtrack for some reason, but I don't remember what it was called.
It's Dragula by Rob Zombie.
Yes, it was. I'm thinking of a different song. Dragula. Yes, I remember that song, and there's Dragula. There's another song in the movie before that he's playing his apartment that they were making a big deal about. I've never read the lyrics of Dragula. I've heard the song a million times.
Dude, it would be worth pulling them up. It genuinely would. You ought to just read the first few lines of the lyrics.
Yeah, let me pull this up. So Dragula lyrics. Dead I am the one, exterminating sun, slipping through the trees, strangling the breeze. Dead I am the sky, watching angels cry, while they slowly turn, conquering the worm. Is that the part you're talking about?
Yeah. So even right there, you see the theme. It's the song too. They're beating you over the head with it every possible place they can.
Yeah. Oh, they absolutely are. I mean, this movie's it's not like hidden. It's right there for anybody to see. They just have to know what they're looking at. They just have to understand the concept that and again, maybe it just wasn't well known to most people back then. Yeah. He meets Trinity at a BDSM club too, which is weird. And I don't know what to make of this. Again, this is a theory that doesn't really fall in line with other theories I'm going to bring up, but I'll just bring it up now. Because there is a lot of transgender-ish themes, and I'll come back to that later. But a lot of people point to this scene and other places with Trinity and Neo's relationship and saying that they're dualistic in their sexuality and their orientation, in the fact that Trinity asks Neo to come to a BDSM club. She's much more straightforward sexually. She's taking charge. She's doing all these things. And Neo's this kind of more passive guy who even denies the woman in the red dress, and he's not coming on to Trinity in the same way. So a lot of people are looking at this as in it's a flip again of the gender binary. I don't know if you make anything of it, but it's interesting.
So we're jumping ahead, but you notice True Love's first kiss, she wakes him up.
Yeah, well, that's the other part that people bring up, is that she's the prince and he's Snow White at the end of the movie. Yeah. There is a gender flip there a little bit.
There very much is. That one, that's just totally undeniable. The whole, and that even plays back on Christ and the church to a degree, because when you look at the role of the prince, of the savior figure, and Trinity sort of taking that, this is an obvious case of the enemy taking that and flipping it and messing with it. It just is.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It is. And what's so funny is I was reading articles dating back to 2002, 2004, whatever, where there's these Christian bloggers who are like, no, you don't understand. The Matrix is a Christian movie because of these allegories. And I'm like, you're totally missing it, man. You're totally missing that they're using the allegories from the Bible to give an alternate version to the Bible in so many ways. And it'll become clear as we go through the story. But it's people who missed that, and we're trying to make the case for, it's like when people, I've read books that are like the Christian case for Star Wars being a Christian story, or
or
they're clearly not. They're very clearly not.
Well, or Harry Potter, but that's another
I've read
story.
that one too. I read the articles on that too. None of those are Christian allegories anyway. So they meet at the club. She starts to wake Neo up. It's, going down the rabbit hole. And the next thing we get is Neo back at his job. And his job, he works for a company called Metacortex. And this is another clue to what's about to happen. Meta means transcending, and cortex is the outer layer, the boundary of the brain. So put together, it's transcending the boundaries of the brain. Very clear symbolism there with Metacortex. Did you have anything to say about the office scene? I was going to kind of skip over. I don't think there was a lot of other symbolically there.
If an employee has a problem, the company has a problem.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, that's obviously sort of, I mean, it just plays into the theme. They're beating you over the head with it again. It's the whole left versus right path. It's the whole collectivist versus individualist sort of mentality. And the two worlds. I mean, nothing more than that.
Yep. And then basically following that, Neo tries to run away, gets interrogated, that whole thing. That was what I was going to bring up. The Neo's birthday's 9/11 comes with that scene, but we already talked about it. Eventually, he meets back up with Trinity. They pull this worm out of this mechanical bug out of his stomach, which is interesting because I wasn't even going to bring this up here, but the whole idea of these mechanical beings that are multi-tentacled and fly around, which you see in the bug and in the Sentinels, is how the Archons are described. And the Archons in Gnosticism are essentially the angels of Yaldabaoth, who are machines, right? They're machines that are here to police us. So you get that idea, obviously, in the police force, in the agents, as Archons. But if you're looking at a metaphysical description of Archons, you'll often see them as flying tentacled monsters. So yeah,
interesting.
More idea that they work for the evil god that created the universe. Yeah.
Yep. You know what struck me about that scene where they get the bug out of him? They have the street, and the line is, "You've been down there, Neo. You know that road. You know exactly where it ends, and I know that's not where you want to be." This is inducting you into the mystery school. That's what this is. This is, there is no looking back now, sort of a thing.
I'm so glad you said that this is where they induct him into the mystery school, because the next thing that we see is he ascends a staircase on black and white checkered floors. If that's not clear Masonic symbolism, I don't know what is. But literally he ascends it to take an initiation ritual with Morpheus.
Okay, so here's another one. Let me bring it up and just ask, because I don't know exactly what they're doing with this. It's raining. It's raining really hard during this scene. And this is a theme throughout the movie. When they face the agents at the end, the sprinklers are on.
Right.
There's this whole raining thing going on at multiple stages. And I noticed a couple of correlations, but I wasn't sure what they were getting at. You have any idea?
I'm glad you brought it up. I can't tell if it was just a popular stylistic thing at the time, because a lot of movies thought fight scenes in the rain were cool. But it does seem important, and I actually don't know what to make of it. So if somebody's watching or listening to this later and you're catching some symbolism that I'm missing with that, leave a comment, because I'd love to know what I'm missing there. The only thing I could think is is it water hurts circuit boards and these agents are part of a machine? I don't know.
I think there's got to be something more to it than that, because it's
repeated
so
enough.
intentional and it's so repeated that it's hard to take it as just being something that's not, super intentional. It has to be, but I don't know what it means.
It probably is. I didn't read any articles that brought it up, though, so maybe I'm missing something, but it definitely seems intentional. So going back to this initiation ritual, he ascends the stairs. He's on the checkerboard floor, the black and white Gnostic dualistic checkerboard floor. He meets Morpheus. Morpheus is the name of the god of dreams in Greek. So you've got a little bit more symbolism there. And in this is the first scene where you get Neo, Trinity, and Morpheus in one place. And a lot of people have pointed out that this is multiple symbolisms going on. It's the Trinity in and of itself. Again, I already pointed out that Trinity's not the whole Trinity. She's really the Holy Spirit, according to Gnosticism. So she's the Holy Spirit. Neo is the Son. Morpheus is the Father.
Right.
You've also got this idea that Neo's will and action, he's the left-hand path, that Trinity's emotion and intuition, she's the right-hand path, and that Morpheus is the gnosis, he's the center, he's the mind and knowledge that you reach at the top chakra. So there's a lot of symbolism going on there, and sometimes it's a little messy and sometimes a little conflicting, But I'm telling you this for anybody listening who's not versed in Gnosticism and mystery schools, it's always like that. It's intentionally muddied and confusing because there's a deeper truth that they're trying to point out, supposedly. I think that their philosophy is just confusing because it's a false philosophy. I think it's baked into it. I think it's not a symptom. It just is what it is.
Well, I agree with you. I think that it's exactly that they get muddy and confusing, but they try to cloak that in secrecy to make it more appealing. Like, we're showing you this great big secret and there is meaning buried in it, but the meaning that's buried in it isn't really clear. It's just they're trying to pack as much crap in there as they can.
Do you think this is why people get so caught up and drawn into these mystery schools? Because they think if I don't understand it, it must mean it's deeper than it is. And in reality, with as much research as I've done into these things, it's not deeper. It's stupid. Like their philosophy is self-contradicting all the time because it's not a clear philosophy.
You're right on the money there.
Yeah, so people get caught up on these things. We're like, well, this contradicts this. I'm like, I'm just pointing out what they believe it is, but what they believe is contradictory in and of itself.
It is, and they think of that as a feature rather than a bug.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Feature instead of a bug. Thank you.
It's a feature, not a bug. It's like this is actually, you are somehow wiser and better because you are trying to delve into this thing that is self-contradictory. It's like
Well, yeah, like I can hold two contradictory thoughts in my head at the same time that makes me smarter than you. And it just makes you the character from 1984.
One hand clapping, PJ.
Right, yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, for real. So this is where we get the most iconic scene in the whole movie, right? We get the red pill, blue pill. And there's so much happening here. One of them is, we talked about earlier, the illusion of choice. You know, the left-hand, right-hand path, the Republicans versus the Democrats. Right. It's a binary choice, and one of them's right, one of them's wrong, but that's already in and of itself the Hegelian dialectic at play. So
right, and that's exactly right. That's exactly what's going on right there, and it's the line that caught me there actually was, it is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth, talking about the Matrix. All I'm offering you is the truth, nothing more. And this is where the real lie starts to get perpetrated in a lot of ways, because it isn't really the truth. It's the dialectic version of the truth. It's the one that's trying to pull you to one hand or the other.
Yeah, and that's what it is. And that's what I find so funny is never in these movies do they make the case like actually there was a better path that wasn't the left or the right. It was like, no, this is the one, but it is the dialectic. They're playing right into it. Even though they're acknowledging it, they're also accepting it. They're accepting that there's one or the other.
Yep.
Yeah, the dualistic nature. I also found this really interesting thing. If you freeze the frame at one spot when he's offering him the pill, you can see that it's not the same. It's not the same Neo. In one hand, and one eyeglass, I should say, of Morpheus's sunglasses, Neo's reaching for the red pill. In the other one, he's just staring at the blue pill. But it's two different Neos. So this is the separation of the body and spirit happening symbolically in the movie. This is where you see on the right-hand side of the screen, you see Thomas Anderson, and on the left-hand side of the screen, you see Neo.
Yeah.
This is where they split.
That's right.
Which I thought was really interesting. He also, after this, I have another one. Do we want to get into the transgenderism stuff now a little bit? Let's talk about it. So,
all right.
There's an idea that secretly, even though this movie's clearly the Gnostic religion being brought to the masses, that there's a theory that the Wachowski brothers have now fed into, even though they denied it for years, probably because it's popular, probably because it gets some press and attention, that this movie was always secretly a story about transgenderism, that the idea that transgender people are on the internet because they feel lonely and they meet their other friends on the internet and they have a spike in their brain that Morpheus describes. It's distract them from reality, and that the pill is to wake up into the new reality or to stay the gender that they were born into, that they were misgendered as, and that the red pill represents estrogen, because the estrogen pills that you would take in the late 90s if you were transitioning were red, and the blue pills are Prozac, and that really it's just about the Wachowski brothers being closeted transgender women, and that it was always the intent. I mean, what are your thoughts on this whole thing? I mean, maybe it's there, but it's not really the point.
No, it isn't. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is that transgenderism is a feature of Gnosticism. It's not a bug. It's like you look at the Baphomet figure. it is transgender. The whole thing, their gods have this transgender aspect to them.
The Barbalos is transgender. It's multiple male and female aspects in one. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, this is always going back to the fact that the Christian God, the creator God, has this thing about mixing. When you're mixing things that aren't supposed to be mixed, it's abominable. It's
oil and
gross.
Water, right? Yeah.
Right. And so the Gnostic system always gets into mixing those things. And we're going to see that over and over in the movie, too.
Well, that's why I thought it was interesting, right? Because it's not really that it was about transgenderism, but transgenderism is a feature of Gnosticism. Therefore, it kind of was, right?
Well, right, exactly. And that's sort of what I was getting at just now, is that I don't think that it was intentionally like aimed at transgenderism, but I do think that it is a feature of the worldview. Right. And so saying that it's present there is totally valid and reasonable. Just it's whatever is the current thing, you try to read it back into stuff where it wasn't aimed at it in the first place.
Well, I would say that transgenderism was baked into the cake with the Matrix because of the character switch. But again, that's because transgenderism is a feature of it. But the whole point, like, it wasn't a massive allegory for transgenderism. It's just that was a feature of it, and that was shown in the character switch.
Yes, and I agree with that. I think that's absolutely true, but I don't think it is all aimed at transgenderism. No, I don't either. I think that's, like I say, I think that's reading the current thing back into something that
Larry Wachowski did that exactly himself, though, because in 2016 he was asked about transgenderism. He's like, "Oh, you know, I was closeted woman back then, and it probably was in the back of my mind. It probably played into it." And then in 2020 he goes before, I can't remember the name of the group, but it's some big LGBTQAIP group or whatever, and he's like, "Yeah, no, it was always there, and it was definitely my whole point was that I was a woman and I was trapped in a man's body, and taking the red pill was me waking up to the fact that I was a woman." And so he changed his story 21 years after the movie came out, after denying that was the story for a long time.
Well, I don't see it. For what it's worth, I don't think it was. No,
I don't either. I think
it's a feature, but yeah.
No, I'm in 100% agreement with you on that. The next interesting symbolism we get is that before Neo steps out of the prison planet, the fake world that he lives into the real world, he touches a mirror, and mirrors in esotericism are a portal to other realities and dimensions. Right. It was very clear.
Well, and the mirror stuck itself to his hand, and it like the mirror ate him. So the portal ate him, and that's one of a couple of times we see that in the movie. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I want to bring this up now or later. We'll bring it up at the end, but we'll come back to that because I've got a really interesting bonus theory for the end of this.
Okay.
So the next thing that happens is he wakes up in an artificial womb, and this is very interesting because matrix means womb. That is actually the definition of matrix. Matrix is the word matrix shows up in the Bible. It's a Greek word, I think, and it shows up in the Bible as womb.
Interesting.
So the whole idea of him waking up in a womb is interesting, and we get this whole concept of the allegory of the cave. Really is kind of the big thing that comes into play here. That the super simplified version, maybe you could do a better job of explaining this than I can, but the super simplified version of Plato's allegory of the cave is if you're in a cave and you're like tied to the wall and you're staring forward and people are doing shadow puppets on the wall, you think that's reality until someone unchains you and you walk out and you see the light of the sun, which is truth. A lot of people reject it and want to come back into the cave because that's the reality they've known. And Morpheus says this to Neo in some way where he's like, we don't usually wake people up this late because they've just bought into the cave, the allegory of the cave.
Well, and then the whole philosopher king thing where the philosopher king's job is to go out of the cave, see things about reality, bring them back into the cave and share them with everybody else. And we see that trope here too in what they're doing to Neo. You know, Morpheus is that figure. He is bringing that truth into Neo, who is the initiate at this point. After he gets out of this artificial womb, he's dropped into the water. And did you notice the scene where he gets pulled up into the ship? Did you see that symbolism there? He's grabbed in this giant hand, and it picks him up into Morpheus' ship, and he's ascending into a portal of light.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I didn't even think about it. It's a rebirth. I mean, there's a lot of death and rebirth in this. Yeah.
Well, there is. That's one of them. But it's that scene was so stark. I'm like, how did I not see that the first time?
No, that's a good point. I didn't even put it in my notes, but you're right. Yeah, he's being brought up into a portal of light. Yeah, in this farm he's in though, like it's explained later, but what you're seeing is humans as batteries, and this is the thing that all these people get hung up on. They're like, look, the amount of brain activity from electricity is not enough to power. It would be humans would be the worst batteries ever, and it's like you're missing the point. And the point is that in Gnosticism, there's such thing as a divine spark, and the idea of the divine spark is that a part of God that exists in each person, except those NPCs, right? That we already talked about,
right.
And the purpose of that divine spark is to free itself from the material world and reconnect with God. So the idea that they're stealing the divine spark of humans is the point. The idea of it being a sci-fi thing about humans would make good batteries is retarded. That's not the point.
The other thing that people that like struck me forcefully with the battery thing is that one of the things that the powers and principalities that rule this world actually do see humans as is a source of worship. Mm-hmm. And this is actually a great allegory for what they do to people. They keep the people who are confused by their lies in a state of, well, it's like the Matrix. They keep them in a state of sort of being asleep, and then they use them for worship and their own power. They just do. That's a feature of reality. So seeing it translated here.
Is this not why it's such a good story? Is this not why it connects with everybody? Yeah. Because even though I'm tearing it apart as a Gnostic fairy tale and I don't believe in Gnosticism, there are absolute truths in this movie about society and about the way that the elites work and the way that they treat us. Like that, those things are real.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that struck most clearly was that exact scene, because that's exactly what they're doing. They use human beings as sources of worship, as batteries.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to reference 2 earlier episodes of Real Conspiracies, if this is your first time tuning in, if you go back and watch the Lego movie episode, they have the exact same thing. They have sentinels that are putting people in a prison where they're using their mind spark. They literally call it the spark in the Lego movie, by the way. It's another Gnostic tale. It's the exact same thing. It's the Matrix for kids is the Lego movie. And then, I shouldn't bring this one up yet. No, it'll come out by the time this is out. The idea of the egregore that I talked about with Jesse, this idea of people feeding in their belief into empowering demonic beings. Is that not what the Matrix is? It's like when you get enough people to believe in it, they give it power. They give power to the principalities of the air.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it.
It is.
The next thing you said, he was lifted up in this portal. The portal takes him into the ship called the Nebuchadnezzar, which is another great.
I actually did a little bit of looking into Nebuchadnezzar.
All right, yeah.
So go. You want me to hit this one?
Yeah, hop into it, man.
Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar refers to the god Nabu, who's the patron god of scribes, rational arts, and wisdom. And interestingly enough, when Marduk became the head of the pantheon in Mesopotamia, Nabu became like the most important first son of the father.
Yep.
And that's like, and it being the patron saint of scribes, rational arts, and wisdom, it's another symbolism for what they're doing. They're inducting him into this secret knowledge.
I love that you went there. My notes are entirely different. So that's awesome that you brought that up. Because my thought was that Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. And that in Daniel 2:3, the King Nebuchadnezzar says, I dreamed a dream, but now that dream is gone from me. And this is actually a line said in The Matrix 2 after the Nebuchadnezzar is destroyed. So it is a reference in that way to King Nebuchadnezzar. But again, that's interesting because King Nebuchadnezzar is named after that god, and the patron god of Babylon, Mesopotamia was Marduk at the time. And you're right. Yeah, that's all interesting. I didn't even think about it from that aspect.
And scribes, rational arts, and wisdom. We've got this secret knowledge thing going on where it's like hitting you over the head with it again, you over the head with it again.
Yep. There's a lot of biblical references in this too. And Nebuchadnezzar, not only a biblical reference in those ways, but if you look at the ship, inscribed on it is that it's Mark 3, number 11. That's the model number for the Nebuchadnezzar. And if you look at Mark 3:11, it reads, and whenever those possessed by evil spirits caught sight of him, they would fall down in front of him shrieking, you are the Son of God. So we've got another Jesus Christ reference to Neo, that these possessed people, eventually the Agent Smith who's possessing the people would bow down before the Son of Man, Anderson, Neo, is right there in the ship. Some more foreshadowing for what's to come in the trilogy.
And in this same scene, just a few seconds later, one of the things that you see is they're saying he still needs a lot of work. They're working on his muscles. Here we see another thing of the initiate being transformed into the hero. Mm-hmm. This is sort of part of that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And once he's starting to rehabilitate, they start plugging him into their construct. So it's not the Matrix, but it's a training program.
Right.
And this is where we're told the Gnostic tale in explicit detail. And the main thing that comes out of this, the idea of the prison planet. You guys have probably heard of the prison planet. That is a Gnostic concept. Again, that our divine spark has to leave the evil material world and reunite with the creator. And, this is also where I just put in that you see the Sentinels, and I think I explained this, but the Sentinels are the Archons, not fallen angels, but the angels of Yaldabaoth. So the angels that we would think of as good, like Michael and Gabriel and stuff like that, they'd be Archons that are trying to keep us in this prison planet, is the Gnostic concept.
Yep.
We also start... Oh, go ahead. Do you have something to say about that?
No, I was going to say, that I don't know how... Are we done with the Gnostic tale that he's telling? Because there were a couple of things in there that I wanted to hit.
Yeah, man. Go ahead.
Okay, so mankind was united in celebration and gave birth to AI. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is actually happening right now.
It is.
And this also is sort of something we see in the book of Revelation in the Bible, where the image of the beast is given breath. It's tying right into it. And then it was us that scorched the sky. Tell me that doesn't ring from some of the things we see in Revelation. They're trying to pull on as many things that are true as possible. The endless fields where human beings are no longer born were grown.
Yep.
Have you seen the artificial womb?
Yep. Farms. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then, this is where I was going to talk about the battery thing. Make sure that we hit that with the whole humans being in the dream world.
Can I go back to one thing you just said before we hit that, though? You said that the line where it says the humans scorched the sky. This is so interesting to me, because at least my belief, and people have different beliefs on this, is that the seals in Revelation are when God is basically letting go of what he's not holding back our own destruction. Right? Like we're going to wring destruction that God's been preventing us from. At least that's one way to read the seals. And I believe one of the seals, the sky will turn to black. So I've compared this even to the possibility that Bill Gates' plan to put, all that stuff into the sky to block the harmful sun rays is going to be us destroying ourselves in Revelation, that we're going to blacken the skies. So when I saw that in the movie, I was like, holy crap. Yeah,
I agree with you on this. I think that's exactly sort of what it's aiming at. And it hit me exactly the same way in the movie. It's like, holy crap.
Yeah. It's wild, right? I mean, there's things in this movie that are like really ring true. And that's why it's such an interesting movie. But what about the humans as batteries?
Oh, we'd already talked about it. We already hit it.
But, okay.
Then the next one that's in this is the one who was born at the beginning of the Matrix is going to be reborn. And this immediately pulls to my mind the Antichrist parallels, where we have this idea of Nimrod being reborn.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Well, that's the thing, is if you don't understand that theory, at least, it's like you could see that as, well, this has to be Jesus Christ they're talking about instead of the Antichrist. And I'm looking at it as like the Antichrist in so many ways. And this is also the part of the movie where they start to ask the question, is Neo the one? And I want to talk about this concept because I think, look, Neo, shift the letters around, it's one. The Oracle tells him he's not the one in order to get him to be the one. I've heard all those arguments, but I think everybody's missing the point. And that's Neo is not a real character. He's a representation of the audience. If one thing rings true throughout the series is that Neo is actually not, people misunderstand this. Neo's not actually the one. He's just a one. He's one who ascended. And the call to the audience is that you can ascend, right? Neo barely speaks. He asks questions almost every time he speaks. He's the audience. He's you being dropped in the story, and what's told to him, and therefore the audience, that you need to transform your mind. You need to escape the Matrix. You are the Christ figure in your own story. You can become as God. Right. Neo's a stand-in for the audience. Am I wrong on this?
No, you're 100% right. And that's partly why it draws people in so effectively, because people want that.
People always see themselves the hero of the story they're watching. So when they're watching Neo, they see themselves as Neo.
And when you're watching it, making it easier for you to do that, part of the as a writer, I would say one of the things that you're trying to do is to draw people in and to make them the hero of your story, to make them identify with your characters. And the easier you make that, the more it's going to draw people in effectively. And they did. They made it really easy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're right on the money.
Yeah. I only had one small note on another construct scene, which is the lady in red. It's this idea. It's kind of a twofold idea. One of them is like sex is a distraction. So society, the people who are controlling you are using pornography and using this and using that to keep you docile, to keep you down, to keep you dumb, to keep you from achieving. And that's definitely like symbolic of what Neo experiences here. He looks away. He looks towards the woman in the red dress, and then the system gets him, right? Yep. But I also think it's a Gnostic concept too, and ascetism is this idea of severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence. So sex, wine, anything that brings pleasure to the body at a high level of Gnosticism is looked at as evil because it is material, and all material things are evil. All pleasures are evil.
What's the kid's name?
Mauser.
Mauser.
Yeah.
Did you notice how he died?
It's just Mouse. It's either Mouse or Mauser.
No, it's Mouse. You're right. It's Mouse. Do you know did you notice how he died?
He was shot to death in a gun battle, right, with his like crazy shotguns.
Right after he tried to escape and found a brick wall in front of him.
Yeah, you're right.
What you're saying about them, that sort of thing being looked at as evil, that was what struck me when he died. Was they're killing him off in a way where he couldn't escape.
Yeah, because he even says he's like, I'm not going to deny my pleasures. He makes a whole speech about it.
He does,
and he's not following the Gnostic path.
Right, and then he couldn't escape, and he dies.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it that way. That's interesting. Yeah.
Now, one other thing before we get too much further here. Right after the construct scene, Neo is talking to Tank, I think. And Tank, do you remember what Tank says?
It's a cool time to be here because you could be the one. Is that the part you're thinking of?
Yeah. And then he says, and Neo asks him, I don't see any ports on you. And Tank says, yep.
Oh, right. He's a full human.
I'm a child of Zion.
Yeah. Zion doesn't get shown in this movie, but again, if you want more religious symbolism, the holy city of God, Zion, is a concept in the Matrix, and it's brought up in this movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this
anyway,
end time city. I didn't put a lot of notes on Zion because it's referenced, and it's a clear reference to the biblical city of Zion, but they don't really, it's the second and third movie that you really see Zion. So
right. Well, and I just noted that again, that is really on the nose, right?
The Nebuchadnezzar one, like normal people aren't going to get, but the Zion one, everybody had to have gotten, right?
Well, and you know what it pulls to my mind is Zionism is sort of a corruption of God's intent for his people Israel in the current day. It's like it isn't right on, right? It's kind of a politicization and almost a manifest destiny of.
It is. It's manifest destiny, but it's kind of like the Pharisees back in the day of trying to make this political kingdom instead of the kingdom of God. So they've like over materialized it.
Right, but what they did in this movie is they made that like the ultimate haven, the place where everybody is, and the source of the dark path's problems, right? If the dark path can get rid of Zion, then they can get rid of their problems and they can win. That the agent even says so to Morpheus later on, where here, and this is reflecting reality in a way that I don't think people quite get, in that the current manifestation of Israel is one that God is going to destroy, because it's the enemy's manifestation of it. It is
right.
So it's echoing reality here in a way that's kind of spooky.
Yeah, because it'll be destroyed and then rebuilt. Yeah,
right.
In Revelation. Yeah, 100%. That's a good point. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even put a lot of notes of Zion, just other than it's a clear biblical reference. But that's a good point.
That's okay. The way you and I think about these things is a little different.
Well, I'm loving this because we're coming with different concepts on everything.
It works great. We work together great on this one. So so that was what I had for that. And then
the Oracle's the next thing I want to talk about, unless you had anything else.
There's one other thing that I noticed here that I'm still thinking about. So he says in the construct scene, he's saying most people are not ready to be unplugged. They're part of the system and will fight to protect it. Anyone we haven't unplugged is potentially an agent. And then here's a quote. Yeah. The agents are the gatekeepers. They're guarding all the doors. They're holding all the keys.
Well, I mean, is that not how the enlightened quote unquote mystery schools think of normal people? Is we can use them. They're our enemy unless they're woken up. It doesn't matter what they do to the sheep, right? It doesn't matter if they slaughter us. It doesn't matter what they have to do because they see an ultimate end. And a lot of us in their belief system are NPCs. We're people without a divine spark. That whole concept, right?
We are, but on the other hand, they're talking about the agents here, and they say the agents are the gatekeepers. They're guarding all the doors. They're holding all the keys. Mm-hmm. And at this point, what did Jesus come back to do? He came to get the keys of hell and death. And so at this point, who's holding all the keys in reality? It isn't the enemy. It isn't the people who are on the Gnostic path. It isn't.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, right?
And now they're pointing to the agents as those. And so this is kind of an inversion moment. This is kind of a...
Well, it is, because the way that you would read it, if you're believing the people who've tried to make this a Christian tale, this is about the second coming of Christ and yada, yada. But if it's the second coming of Christ, why does the enemy have the keys?
Right.
Yeah. Because the archons, the enemy, are the angels, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the agents are
the archons.
Right, exactly. And they're holding all the keys. And I'm like, okay, well, that isn't a clear enough reference.
Yeah, but the thing, it keeps making it clear that it is an enemy of Christ, that this movie's about the enemies of Christ.
Right. Well, it is, but I'm just, that one just stuck out to me really strongly. Anyway, so on to the Oracle. That's the next notes I have too.
Yeah, the Oracle.
And I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question. Why is the Oracle inside the Matrix?
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because the Oracle in cryptography is a system which can give extra information on the system. An Oracle, in layman's terms, is an algorithm.
Yeah.
So they're telling you who she is. I mean, I was going to bring this up later, but the cookie, she makes Neo eat a cookie. It's a whole joke, right? It's like, if you want this website, you have to take the cookies, right? Yep. If you want to use this website, if you want the algorithm to be able to track you and know you, you got to take the cookies. So she's in the system because she's part of the system. I mean, this is a deeper part of Gnosticism that I wasn't going to go super into because it's really messy and hard to understand. But she's part of the Barbalos, I think, in a way. She's a being from before Yaldabaoth.
Right.
She's above Yaldabaoth. She might. I mean, I looked at her as a possible Sophia in a lot of ways.
Well, sure, and like you say, these things are messy, and that's a feature, not a bug, and they're contradictory. And so I think you're right in that. But I also do think that her being inside is actually, and she is an expression of the system itself, and she is also there from before the time of the creation, which is, I mean, you can't get much clearer than that. But I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, her and the Architect, I know the Architect doesn't come up until number 2. The Architect is very clearly Yaldabaoth, and if I do an episode, when I do an episode number 2, I'll get into all of that. But the Architect is God that created this universe. And again, Jesus Christ, who's Neo in this in this allegory, is against God, right? Which is the Gnostic belief, that they're not simpatico, right? And that comes up in the Lego movie, which I just recently talked about. But yeah, I mean, the Oracle thing is kind of messy, I think, on purpose. She is a being from before. But is it also part of the false binary? Like, you either serve the system or you serve the algorithm? Because that's a weird thing to me too. Is she not part of the system in a way?
She is. And then the other thing is, it's like in Star Wars, the restoring of balance to the Force, the system has become tyrannical and overbearing. The dark side of the path is too strong. She is sort of restoring balance by bringing Neo into the picture, right? So I think that's a part of it too.
Well, that's the Kabbalah tree, right? It's like the left and the right hand are both good. They'll just get you to the top chakra. So there's not even in Gnosticism and these mystery schools, there's not even a real distinction between good and evil.
Well, and she even says it. Try not to think in terms of right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
She's a guide, Neo. She can help you find the path. Or that, I think it's,
Yeah, it's kind of Eastern mysticism too, right? There's no clear distinction.
Right. It's coming straight out and saying, try not to think in terms of right and wrong. She's a guide. So, Yeah.
Yep.
Right on the money.
Yep. And this is also the scene where you get the spoon, and the spoon is the gnosis. The spoon is the gnosis. The spoon is the gnosis of this world doesn't exist. And as soon as Neo reaches gnosis and realizes the world doesn't exist, that's when he fully ascends to 33. We'll come back to that, but that's very clear. Actually, that's where I was going to go next. Anyway, I mean, I had notes on Agent Smith, but we could talk about him in a minute. But the spoon is that gnosis, right? So by the end of the movie, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. There's not a lot of important things symbolically going on, but Morpheus is captured. Neo makes the choice to save Morpheus. He's doing things differently than they would expect. He's following the guidance of the Oracle. She caused him to.
I was going to say. Would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything? Going on to the vase, she's like, I'm causing you to do this, maybe.
Yeah, and then she tells him he's not the one, so that he will act the way that he needs to be the one. Yeah, exactly.
Right, which is at a base manipulative, and again, this is just showing the enemy's hand in a sense. It's like that isn't the way God works. That isn't the way truth works. Right?
Yeah, to lie to get to your ends is okay if it's the right lie, is kind of that thing. Yeah.
Well, okay, so there are some things here that especially in the talk between Morpheus and the agents, I think is one of the most sort of mind-blowing lines in the movie. But even before we get there, we hadn't talked about Cypher and Cypher becoming Judas.
Yeah.
And the point that I wanted to make there is that people need to understand this war between the left hand and the right hand, the light side and the dark side, is not fake. And that's the thing that's sort of hard to understand about this. The enemy is manipulating both sides, but it isn't fake. The tools on both sides genuinely believe in their cause. They are fighting as hard as they can for their side.
Right.
And so when you get a Judas character like Cypher, he genuinely, wholeheartedly believes in what he's doing. He is totally sick of knowing the truth, of being awakened, and he wants to go back. He wants to close his eyes. And so that's how they make it real. Their tools actually believe what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so there is that bit. And then we get to the whole thing with Morpheus. And can I go into that real quick?
Let's
because
do it.
There are a couple things here that I thought were just truly fascinating. So that line, humans are a virus, that Agent Smith does, I don't know that the Matrix was the first time that was used in popular culture, but it was certainly the one that made it like...
It wasn't, probably because Paul Ehrlich wrote a book with that concept in the 50s, and that is that's where the whole population... I've done episodes on this before, but the whole population bomb concept goes back to way before. But this is feeding into that.
Right, it is. Well, and this is bringing it into entertainment, bringing it into story, and feeding it into people's minds as call it a mind virus. Thinking of the human race as being a virus is something that the enemy very much wants us to do, and this is the dark side showing its hand again. This is exactly that. And then there was another line that he did, and then I want to get to the one that really stuck out to me. Anyway, human beings define their reality through suffering.
Right.
What exactly is he trying to do there? Because that's an interesting one. Anyway.
I think it comes back to the Gnostic concept of, we think that suffering is good and that we can overcome and all things are good, but what would be better is to escape the material world altogether. I think it's kind of that concept.
Fair enough. Yeah. Now, let me read you this line. This is Agent Smith speaking to Morpheus, but instead I want you to think of this as being Lucifer himself speaking. I'm going to be honest. I hate this place, this zoo, this prison, this reality. I can't stand it any longer. I need the codes. I have to get inside Zion, and you're going to tell me how.
Oh, yeah, it's Lucifer. I mean, I had in my notes that Agent Smith is the Lucifer character of the story, for sure.
Oh, he is, but
because he's also the one that sways Cypher, Judas, to betray the Jesus character,
Very much so, but that line... It makes even more sense if it were the enemy himself saying that to us.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Wow.
This is a theory. I'm not going to go deep into this, but this is an important point in culture that we're at right now, where we take all the villains of our childhood and we've tried to make them the heroes. Was Thanos correct in Avengers? This is one of the things you'll read about online. Well, this comes up more in 2 and 3, which is why I'm saying I'm not going to go deep into it. But the idea that Agent Smith was the one before Neo is a big theory online, and the idea that Agent Smith was the good guy and correct is another big theory. So the whole idea of them depicting him as Lucifer, and therefore this is saying Lucifer bad, God good, is actually just not in there. It's kind of saying Yaldabaoth bad by the time you get to the second movie, and maybe Lucifer has some points, is where you kind of get to by the end of the series, right? There's a really compelling case that Agent Smith was human before he became the part of the program, that he was the original or one of the previous 6 Messiah figures that came before Neo, and that choice that he makes in 2 is what brought him around to becoming Agent Smith, and that's why he's different than the other agents, and that's why he's able to infect them and take them over and do all these things. So I know it's a different movie subject, but I just thought it was interesting that you get this idea of humans as a virus, but then you also have people defending that maybe he's correct, because we really do live in an age of people who've been psyoped into thinking of, humans and birth and things like that as evil. Yep. The physical being evil again, like he wants to escape this world as much as everybody else. Agent Smith does. He wants to escape the Matrix. So he does. Yeah, he's Lucifer though. Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Okay. And then from there, I didn't see anything terribly critical up until they're talking about Neo beginning to believe. Mm-hmm. So where were you at on?
Yeah, after that scene, there's a lot of action, and it's cool action. But as far as symbolism goes, I think it really boils down to, if we take what I was saying earlier with take the cookie, the spoon doesn't exist. That's the gnosis that the spoon doesn't exist is the lesson that was told to Neo that he had to fully realize and actualize. And this is where he does that, is when it circles around to the beginning of the movie again. Well, it's the end of the movie, but it's the beginning location. It's the heart of the city hotel, and the movie ends where it begins in room 303, and this is where Neo reaches the 33rd level, and he dies and resurrects, in a very interesting way. He dies, and then Trinity, the Holy Spirit, breathes new life into him. She becomes the Prince Charming to his Snow White, which is interesting. And this is where Neo achieves gnosis, and he realizes that the world that he grew up in doesn't exist. Earlier, when he comes back in the Matrix, he's like, "Oh, I used to eat at that restaurant, and the food's good." And he's not awake. He doesn't reach gnosis. He's still seeing the Matrix as somewhat real. And he hasn't fully, the jump test. He hadn't passed that the first time. And this is where not only does he completely wake to gnosis, and he's shown that because he's stopping bullets and he's fighting at speeds that he wouldn't be able to do before, but then you see through his eyes for a moment, and he sees the code. And that's the clue that he has reached that 33rd degree, that he's at a full realization that this is his tale, this is his journey to gnosis. And I don't even know if they planned on making a trilogy originally, because I've always felt like this movie was a good standalone, and it could have ended there with him, he's reached gnosis, now he's at the end of the movie making phone calls and waking others up. He's going to bring people to that 33rd degree.
On a practical level, they couldn't be sure how well the movie was going to do, so making it a standalone only made sense, but leaving it open for a trilogy, which is kind of what they did.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one other little thing I noticed is after Neo is waking everyone up through the phone calls that Morpheus was doing in the beginning, you see it says system failure, and then it zooms up on the M and the F, and it ends with the M and the F. And I think it just brings it back around to male-female Gnostic dualism. Is that too much of a stretch? It's just weird to focus on those 2 letters.
I don't know. I mean, I could see it. I don't know.
And it might be a stretch, but some people have pointed it out, so I thought it was worth bringing up.
There were a couple of things that sort of stuck out to me too, though. Did you notice when Neo, essentially when he attacked Agent Smith, how did he do it? It wasn't like he shot him or destroyed him somehow. He infected him.
It's weird, isn't it?
He mixed with him.
Yeah.
Tell me
I don't fully understand that part either. That's the one part I was a little bit scratching my head going I didn't fully get it, I guess.
Well, okay. So when you think back to what Gnosticism is doing at its base, it is taking the truth of God and it is mixing it with lies to the point where it's no longer effective. And in this case, Neo going and jumping into Agent Smith is sort of the opposite of what Jesus Christ is going to do when he returns to Earth. Yeah. It's like, it's just another twisting and turning on its head of what's real and good.
I didn't really get into the Thelema elements of the movie. There's a couple that pop up. Some people bring up the first number in the movie that focuses on it. You know, I said the end focuses on MNF. The first time you see that sequence, it focuses on 506, which the 5 represents the microcosm, the 6 represents the macrocosm, and the 0 in between is God, and this is the planetary. It's this whole idea in Thelema, using those 3 numbers specifically. I'm not making this up out of whole cloth. Yeah. But if you do take the Thelema element, Thelema is a religion that was created by Aleister Crowley. What Aleister Crowley was trying to do with his magic was to summon demons and then possess them. So was that the point? Was it a Thelema thing? Was it him saying that I'm so powerful now as a magician that I can infect I can possess the demons?
Yeah, actually, I think that is what it was. That's where it goes to me anyway. And
I don't know how else to read it than that. He's like a high level. He's a 33rd degree magician now, right? So he's like able to do that type of magic,
right? And well, and that fits right in with the overall theme of the thing, right? It's like what they're aiming for is exactly that. It is a Gnostic gospel story. It is a Gnostic savior story. And so, of course, that's where he's going to end up. That's, of course, the weapon he's going to use.
Yeah. You talked about the mirror earlier, how it stuck to his hand. And I got to ask you, what does that look like? If you thought of another popular sci-fi movie, did it look like something you've seen before?
It's not coming to me.
Terminator 2.
Okay, yes.
Liquid metal
yes, I'm with
cop, you. Terminator 2.
Yep.
This is where I said I was going to bring up an interesting bonus conspiracy here. So there's this woman named Sophia Stewart, and she sued the Wachowskis in 2004, saying that she sent them her story in the 80s, a book called The Third Eye. And that out of this book, Warner Brothers took her book and turned it into the Terminator and the Matrix. And that originally the Terminator was a prequel to the Matrix. And that this is all the same cinematic universe stolen from her book. And if you look at her Twitter page, she says, I'm the owner or creator / owner of the Matrix and the Terminator films, the official owner of both franchises as per adjudicated in the Utah federal courts in 2014. This is not true, by the way. She did not win this case. She's been making this case forever, but you can just look up like all these different articles about her. It's like, did she win a $2.5 billion lawsuit against them? Did the Wachowskis actually admit that they stole it from her? Like, she's just going off on this. And at first I was like, maybe they stole it from her. And then the more I looked into this lady, the more I realized that she is like this race huckster who's like trying to claim it. So she like to just go on with some more of her crazy lies. She said that she inspired Obama to become president because she wrote a comic book about black superheroes in the 80s that no one read. She's like, Obama had to have read it. That's the only reason a black man would run for president, because I wrote a comic book in the 80s about black superheroes and one of them became a president. So Obama wouldn't be president right now if I didn't write this. She's crazy, dude. She's this nutbag.
This is not narcissistic at all.
It's so funny. At first I wanted it to be true, this whole concept, but
wow.
Let me just play you. I just want to play you this little TikTok that like goes in her theory. And I listened to her interviews, and this is not a theory from people who watch the movies and notice it. This is her theory on what the Matrix and Terminator are in her own words.
The Terminator serves as a prequel to the Matrix, where Sarah Connor is actually Neo's mother. John Connor, or JC, symbolizes Jesus Christ and eventually becomes Neo in the Matrix. The Matrix depicts the future, while the Terminator represents the past, exploring time travel across eras. This story mirrors the second coming of Christ and the evolution of consciousness, highlighting the clash between man and machine. The Terminator machines learn of a future child destined to defeat them, representing the struggle of God's children against man's technological creations. To prevent this, the Terminator travels back to eliminate Sarah Connor. Kyle Reese comes from the future to protect her and unintentionally impregnates her before returning to his time, leaving Sarah in love and pregnant. In the sequels, the child grows up unaware of the Terminator's intent until he eventually uncovers the truth while evading them.
Yeah, so that's her theory. She says that this is the Immaculate Conception because she wasn't sure if Kyle really existed. And she has this whole theory based on this. I found it kind of wackadoo and funny. I just want to get your thoughts on it.
Wow. I don't know that I have thoughts. It is pretty out there, man.
Here's her proof, by the way. Here's her book. It's called The Third Eye by Sophia Stewart. And if you read the description on Goodreads, it says The Third Eye, Sophia Stewart's epic story, was purportedly stolen and used to create two of Hollywood's biggest franchises, The Matrix and The Terminator. Also contains additional information such as court documents, letters, yada, yada. If you go down and read the reviews on this, it's like, this is not a book. It's a 16-page outline of something that sounds kind of maybe similar to The Matrix and The Terminator, even though there was tons of other movies that were doing that same concept for decades.
Yeah.
And then it's like 200 pages of court documents. And if you read the court documents, she didn't have anything. She didn't have any, like, she's still running off this, even though her book's like full of 1-star reviews of like, this is a 16-page nothing with a bunch of court documents that don't say what it says. So it's like one of those fun internet theories. And then you dig into it and it's like, it's just this crazy, crazy woman. But I love the idea of the Terminator being a prequel to the Matrix in some way. I think it's kind of funny.
Oh, I had never heard this, and that is pretty funny.
Yeah, so I just thought it'd be interesting to bring up because I feel like when you dig into the Matrix, you always eventually come across Sophia Stewart and her claims, and they're at least as far as I can tell pretty baseless, but still funny.
So what else have you got? Anything else here?
That was my bonus theory, man. I really enjoyed covering this with you, man.
Me too. So I got one thing to close with, and it's actually a good way to close. The symbolism toward the end of the movie, what they're saying over and over again, just comes back to it's sort of like the one monologue. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how this is going to begin. A world where anything is possible. Mm-hmm. And the idea is this is bringing people into the Great Awakening, bringing people into the one hand of the path overcoming the other hand of the path.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's that red pill, blue pill moment for everybody, right?
And that's how it ends.
Yeah, it is a good ending. Jared, I had so much fun talking about this with you. Do you want to tell people where they can find you, where they can pick up your book and learn more about you?
Absolutely. So, I am a fiction author. My first book was released in April. My second one was released just a few weeks ago. And I would love to have people come to e6universe.com. And if you sign up for the email list, you can get free ebooks for both of the books. As PJ and I have been talking about this, you can kind of tell where my passion is. It's in telling stories that align with and point back to the Lord, point back to Jesus Christ, and bring some truth out of the world into the story for people to see. It's one of those things, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were the last great Christian myth makers, and it's something that we're sorely lacking. And so I'm just contributing whatever I can to that arena.
I love it, man. And as the more I do this show, the more I realize that the greatest myth makers today are all telling the same story. It's the Gnostic story. So I love to see what you're doing, bringing the Christian story and the Christian myth to people in a way that they can engage with. That's why The Matrix is so effective, is because it is a story that has truths in it. It's a story that reaches people. Fiction is powerful. And a lot of people just didn't even understand what the fiction was, yet we're living in an era where people are really bought into the simulation theory. They're really bought into the Gnostic myth. Even if they've never heard the word Gnosticism, simulation theory is Gnosticism, and it is popular. It's extremely popular right now.
The thing that I am coming to realize more and more, the most powerful story in history was the story of Jesus Christ. And it's the fact that it is a true story, but it's the story, it's the passing on of what happened from one person to another that changed the world. Mm-hmm. Today, you cannot get away from it. Even in politics, even the people who deny that they believe it, they still appeal to it for moral authority. It has become the most powerful story in history, and the only way that we are going to regain any kind of foothold in the culture, in our societies, is to tell the story in a way that people can relate to and connect with. And so that's sort of my vision, my mission, my aspiration is to do that.
I love it, dude. And again, like even with this story, is you have to appeal to the Christian myth that everybody knows,
right?
But they're appealing to it and twisting it. So to see someone come in and appeal to that story that is the most powerful story ever told, and happens to be a true story as well, in a way that's not distorting the Gospels, is awesome. So I love what you're doing, man.
You know what the next story is, right, PJ?
What's the next story?
The next story is the story of the Bride of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's the story I'm trying to tell. So
I love it, man. So again, will you drop, what's the website again?
It's the letter E, the number 6universe.com.
All right. So go to E6 Universe. And if you liked this, please give it a thumbs up, a 5-star review, anything to help grow the podcast. Support Jared and his work. Thank you guys for watching this episode. Until next time, keep it real.